Good evening from Brisbane, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement and how it benefits tech in business. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land across Australia, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people who may be joining us here this evening. It's an absolute pleasure for the Department for Business and Trade, for the UK Government Network in Australia to be partnering with our Australian colleagues at Austrade today. And this session is aimed at supporting tech businesses in both Australia and the UK to understand and utilise the Free Trade Agreement to help you conduct cross-border trade and investment activities between our two amazing countries. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session and it will be made available on the Austrade and DPT websites after this event. Please put any questions that you have this evening in the chat throughout the webinar, and we'll make sure that we answer them and ask them during our panel discussion later in the session. So to start with some introductions, I'm Richard Cowan. I'm the Consul General for Queensland and the Northern Territories for the British government here in Australia. I'm also the country director for the Department for Business and Trade. A very, very warm welcome to my counterpart in London, Anna Nishinadze, Australia's Trade and Investment Commissioner for the UK and Ireland, based there in London, to Kirsty Whitford, our Senior Trade and Development Manager here at DPT in Australia, to Kate Montgomery, the Director of Marketing for Telstra in the UK, to George Riddle, Director of Trade Strategy at EY in the UK. And many of you will probably know that this is the last of our two webinars for tech businesses about the FTA. Last week we explored the FTA provisions and market environment for fintech, whilst today's session is going to focus on the broader technology industry and the innovation provisions of the FTA. So a little bit about our program and what we're going to do. We are going to have a brief overview of two-way trade and investment and an introduction to the FTA. Then we're going to look at macro trends and opportunities in tech in Australia and the UK. And this is really, really important because of the business opportunities are the reason that I think you're here today and one of the things that makes the FTA really exciting. Then we're going to move into a panel discussion which will be moderated by Kirsty Whitford, and it will focus on how businesses can utilise the FTA to their advantage. And we're very grateful to have Kate and George join us for that channel. And following the panel discussion, we'll have time for a bit of Q&A. So as I said, please do pop those questions into the chat and we'll do our best to cover them towards the end of the webinar. So moving on to our next slide, please. So a very quick overview of trade and investment between the UK and Australia. So that trade and investment from the UK to Australia. So the UK exported about £10 billion of goods and services to Australia in 2022, and it imported about $4.4 billion from Australia over that same period. So our trade together is worth about £15 billion. That's about 30 million Aussie dollars. So I think that's pretty significant for both of our countries. We are also very big investment partners. So foreign direct investment from Australia to the UK totals $16.1 billion, making it the second largest destination behind the USA. That was in 2021. And the UK is also the second largest source of investment in Australia. And in 2019, that was worth some 686 billion Aussie dollars. Just as a matter of interest, there's things that we kind of import and export to each other. So from the UK to Australia, there's lots of medicines, lots of pharma, lots of cars, lots of services, and also quite a lot of alcohol too. And then in the other direction, there is also a lot of services, a lot of iron ore, a lot of metals, but also a lot of alcohol too. So I think we've got some very thirsty people on both sides of that UK-Australia relationship. But anyway, moving on to our next slide, and just to give us a very quick overview of the FTAs. So they both, the FTA entered into force on the 31st of May. It is a gold standard FTA. It eliminates pretty much all of our tariffs on goods, but it's also really, really important in the services sector as well. I say that because when I go out and talk to businesses, they tell me that they want certainty on their supply chains, certainty on their data flows, and certainty and confidence in their ESG arrangements. And this agreement does all of that. It goes further than any other trade deal that the UK or Australia has with anybody else. It locks us into dialogue mechanisms for certainty, and it binds us together in areas of shared challenge. So that includes things like environmental conservation, gender equality, animal welfare, and there are also some very special provisions around First Nations. And right now, we're still within that first 100 days of entering into force. So together, Austrade and DBT are working to support our businesses and help them utilize the things that are available out there. So these webinars are just the beginning of it. So if we could move on to our next slide, please, and just look at, or just consider quickly some of the highlights around the FTA for the tech sector. So what I hear more than anything is that tech is reliant on human capital, and it's the human capital and that confidence in the relationship between the UK and Australia that really drives opportunities in this sector. But some of the other highlights that are there. So it's improved digital trade, particularly the free flow of data, meaning that there are less restrictions on the collection, processing and transferring of data between our two countries. There's also a very important bit around access to public sector contracts, including for the digitally delivered services. And just as I mentioned before, that focus on human capital, what this FTA does around mobility is actually very special. It increases the mobility and mutual recognition of qualifications between our two countries. I think one of the most apparent and most kind of immediately visible things is that our working holiday and youth mobility schemes, the age limit for that has increased from the age of 18 to 30 to the age of 18 to 35. And it's also allowed us to increase the amount of time that people can spend on those schemes up to 3 years in both countries. Obviously, that comes in over a period of time. But there are also some very new visa provisions that will enable, make intra-corporate transfers even easier, and a new pathway for Australian innovators to come to the UK. But what I'd like to also just highlight here in this tech space is that the FTA has an innovation chapter. It's the world's first dedicated innovation chapter in any FTA, and it puts together a strategic innovation dialogue for the UK and Australia, which will help us drive the commercialization of new technology, help us ensure that our regulatory environment remains aligned, giving you that confidence into the future. And it will help, through that, it will help with technological developments. The dialogue will also include consultation with business experts and stakeholders to inform all of these discussions. So we really do encourage you to talk to us, to talk to DBT, to talk to Austrade about any issues that you may be facing, so that we can help put those on the table and we can help solve those and keep this relationship and this agreement fresh into the future. So at that point, I would like to hand over to Anna from Austrade to cover trends in the UK for Australian tech exporters and things that they should be aware of when they are considering the UK as an export market. So Anna, over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard, and thank you very much for partnering with Austrade on the delivery of this fantastic webinar. So look, Richard spoke a little bit about the importance of trade investment flows between Australia and UK, and that we are already very close trading partners. I think that creates a really strong and important baseline for businesses to do more together. And in my kind of part of the presentation, I'd just like to highlight why UK is an important market for Australian exporters. So UK is the third largest digital technology sector in the world. And despite all of the various economic downturns that have been experienced globally, UK has been doing actually pretty well when it comes to growth in its technology sector. We're not going to, pretend that no, there hasn't been impact. Of course, there's been impact. There's been impact globally. We are experiencing the cost of living crisis. We've seen significant inflation. But what we've seen in terms of the UK tech sector is that there's still been consistent growth. Growth not as significant as last year, but there is still a significant growth compared to previous years. And also what's interesting is that we've seen that the levels of investment into tech have reduced globally, but UK is still outperforming several countries around the world. It is still third for tech investment in the world, but also it has been impacted less than some of its other countries like the US and others. So we're still seeing those significant flows. And UK has also been ranked quite highly in terms of its innovation, and we've seen significant adoption and engagement in innovation and new technology here in the UK. So if we go to the next slide, please. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that are happening in the UK that sort of really stand out. So earlier this year, UK government released its plans to make UK an international technology superpower, and it released its international technology strategy to do that. So that was really an important signal from the UK government that they will continue to invest and support innovation and adoption of technology across the UK, and they will continue to invest in creating an environment that facilitates that technology innovation. So whether it's through regulation or policy or other mechanisms. So I think that makes it quite an interesting place to consider. To further complement that, UK also released its quantum strategy, so similar to us in Australia. The strategy really sets out the ambition and the commitment of the UK government to really scale how quantum can transform products, services, and really be embedded in day-to-day lives of Brits. So that's quite interesting, and there's some investment and funding that's connected to that strategy as well, and that creates opportunities for more collaboration, research and innovation between Australia and the UK on quantum, and a really attractive landscape for Australian quantum companies to land and explore what's possible here in the UK. I think more broadly, it's important to highlight that the UK has always been quite forward-thinking when it comes to regulation. We've seen several sandboxes rolled out across the UK, which allow businesses to come and test their products in a real-life environment with real-life data here in the UK, and really start engaging with consumers while they're still going through various regulatory approvals. So earlier this year, UK implemented the digital sandbox permanently, where before you had to go through various rounds. That sandbox is now available for companies to use permanently, and there's also an AI sandbox that they're currently working on to enable more AI application businesses to test their products and solutions. So it's always been on a front foot when it comes to regulation, looking at how it can address barriers and facilitate further innovation, and this clearly continues to be focus on that. I mentioned investments, so I'm not going to talk more about that, but there are significant flows of VC funds in the UK that you can tap into. But more importantly, There's also a lot of government backing and support. Some of you who've been operating in the UK for a while, who've been talking to us, might have heard us talk about UK government's levelling up agenda. That's quite interesting because what UK government wants to do, it wants to create an ecosystem more broadly across the UK, not just focused on London. Yes, London is an exciting hub, but it's not all just about London. So UK government's been investing a lot into growing those centres and ecosystems across the UK, and that creates opportunities for businesses to tap into support and funding that's available across different regions, which could be quite helpful for those who are looking to grow and set up their businesses in the UK. The next two things that I'd like to mention is, of course, the huge focus and access to research and innovation in the UK. It's home to some of the largest forward-thinking universities. It has over 500 nationally and internationally significant research and innovation infrastructures. So if you are really in that sort of new innovative cutting technology field, there's an opportunity for you to come here, work with those research institutions to further innovate and grow your products. And finally, UK has been doing a lot to grow its talent. We all talk always about competition for talent. UK has been, government's been, and various regional institutions have been working a lot with universities to see how they can grow the next pipeline of technology talent for you to tap into. So all of that makes UK quite an interesting market for Australian companies to consider. So if we go to the next slide, which is my last slide, probably a couple of things to point out in terms of some of the trends and where we think opportunities lie. So first of all, impact tech. So anything that has strong social responsibility or sustainability or environmental focus, there's a huge opportunity here. UK has very clear targets around net zero transition. It focuses a lot on the ESG credentials. It works across industries and businesses to implement some robust reporting and measurement of the social contribution, of environmental contribution, and ensure that everyone has strong sustainability credentials. It's an absolutely must requirement here, which creates a lot of opportunities for businesses who are playing in that space. Health and wellness, of course, coming out of COVID, that's really been a big focus for all countries, and we've since UK invest a lot into the innovation around digital health, medtech, biotech. It's also got those industries are quite strong here because of the strong university focus, and I think there's a strong appetite to innovate in that space because we're seeing a lot of pressure on the NHS system. So that creates opportunities for businesses in that area. Fintech's always been a big focus for the UK. It's one of the financial hubs of the world, so there's no surprise there. Cybersecurity, I think UK is not alone in that, but it's important. It's becoming more and more important that as we are implementing more digital tools and solutions, we are focused on cybersecurity and how that interacts and integrates into various services. Space technology. So there's a strong link into looking at how we actually monitor and scale our communication, how we monitor what's happening in our environment. Space technology obviously plays a key role within that. So what's interesting on space is that it's not just about your typical kind of defense industries. It's really about that civil application of space and how it can further impact and improve our day-to-day lives. And finally, deep tech. So quantum, blockchain, AI, robotics, integration of that into various services and products, and really looking to those future and forward technologies is something that we've seen a lot in the UK in terms of appetite to adopt those and look at them. So there's some of the key trends. The free trade agreement creates a great opportunity for us to look at how we can help more businesses scale into the UK market, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And at this point, I'll hand over to Kirsty.
Thanks very much, Anna. And I'm here to give you a bit more of an overview on the Australian market for those UK companies that are looking to move to our country. So just to give you a bit of a primer, if we can go to the next slide, please. So our population is a little bit smaller than the UK, so around 26 million people, but luckily for us, and I think a good sign that we've already got strong relationships between Australia and the UK, around about 1.2 million Brits actually call Australia home already. So you will be in good company if you choose to move out into the Australian market. Now, we're tied to the UK, obviously, by culture, by common language, but also by business and legal practices as well. So that really makes Australia a pretty desirable market for international expansion. Australia has the 12th largest economy in the world. We're ranked 8th as a top direct investment direction, and our cities like Sydney and Melbourne actually rank in the global top 10 cities for that. We're ranked 10 in the top 10 for advanced digital infrastructure and 4th in the world for the most attractive digital market. So what that tells you is Australia actually is a very, very good adopter and an early adopter of technology. So not only do you have a good consumer base for your tech, but also you've got a proving ground and a testing ground for your proof of concepts. Now, pulling together all of the technology subsectors, tech is actually Australia's 3rd largest industry. It's valued about 167 billion Australian dollars, and that's about 8.5% of Australia's GDP. Now, it's actually expanded pretty quickly. It's expanded by about 80% in the last 5 years, and that's really set to grow even more rapidly. We're predicted to reach about 250 billion Australian dollars by 2030. Now, Australia does have a demonstrated ability to grow global tech companies already. So you've got household names like Canva, Afterpay, Cultureamp, Airwallex, and Atlassian, and they've all made a splash on the global stage. And what's exciting is we now actually have 21 tech unicorns in Australia, and that compromises about 2.3% of unicorns globally. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a small number, but actually in comparison, it's well above our 1.6% share of global GDP. So I think we're doing okay in Australia for tech growth. Next slide, please. Now, Australia does have a plan to be a leading digital economy and society by 2030. So we'll see that sort of tech ecosystem growing more and more as we're looking to meet that pledge. So in particular, Australia has good government support for tech. So that's from grants to tax offsets, and that includes things like R&D tax incentives. We've also got policies and strategies in place at both a national and state and territory level that's really there to support tech and innovation. That's everything across critical technology and innovation, skills training in tech, cybersecurity, and more. We've also got a pretty thriving innovation ecosystem. We've got more than 100 innovation hubs and clusters across the country, and they're developed between government, between industry, and between academia. And they're across areas like medicine, advanced manufacturing, agriculture, and deep tech. We've also got a growing investment ecosystem. So Australia attracted 7.4 billion Aussie dollars in tech investment funding in 2022. And we're seeing government and private investment in areas like deep tech sort of continuing on. This week alone, one of the main Aussie VCs, Main Sequence Ventures, has raised 450 million Australian dollars to invest further in its deep tech fund. So we're seeing more and more of that continuing. Like the UK, Australia is growing its tech skills market. So we're currently ranked 6th in the world for the digital skills that are required to support tech innovation. And the tech industry employs about 870,000 people, but there's more and more pledges to grow that. So increased training, supportive in education means that we're hoping to grow that labour pool to about 1.2 million by 2030. Now, if all of that wasn't enough, Australia's time zone and our close regional ties to Asia also really makes it a great place to have your APAC headquarters and use Australia as a springboard, not only into APAC, but also into New Zealand and Oceania as well. Next slide, please. So just like in the UK, there are a number of key trends that are happening in Australia at the moment that will provide opportunities for incoming UK companies. So first and foremost, Australian businesses are really big IT spenders. They're going through a phase at the moment where they're upgrading to modern infrastructure. They're encompassing sort of SaaS solutions, data capability, and other digital transformation capabilities in their day-to-day work. In fact, IT spending in 2022 reached $117 billion. So there's a good, solid market for us there. Australia is also set to have 5G coverage across 95% of the population by 2025. So we're also a growing testbed for 5G innovation, and that's in areas like mining, healthcare, transport, and utilities. Now, you may have seen in the news over the past 12 months that we've been sort of subject to a number of cyber attacks. And whilst bad for us, it also means that about 60% of Australian companies are looking to increase their cyber spend this year. And that's across all major industries. So government, health, education, financial services, retail. So demand is quite heavy, and it exists in areas like managed security services, cloud and data security, and then sort of your offensive and defensive cyber opportunities. We've also seen a rapid increase in the demand and acceptance of digital health technologies. So there's sort of opportunities there around, remote monitoring, data analytics, mobile health and applications. And then, as Anna mentioned, for the UK, our sort of interests in deep tech are very well matched. So we're also looking at increasing areas around quantum and AI. So the quantum tech industry in Australia is set to be valued about $6 billion Australian dollars by 2045, and they're looking to employ about 19,000 people. So that sort of growth is really being backed by research centres of excellence across the country. We've got strong government support with a national quantum strategy and funding sources at both national and state levels. And we're also seeing a similar amount of interest in AI, and particularly around applications across manufacturing, agriculture, and healthcare. Climate commitments are also opening up opportunities for clean tech, and particularly those that enable corporate net zero journeys. So everything from emissions reporting and tracking, sort of technology that enables green mobility, process efficiency, all the way to agriculture benefits across things like satellites and robotics, etc. There's also a growing market for digital games in Australia. Both federal and state level support and tax incentives are here for you to take advantage of, particularly if you're looking at setting up a studio in Australia. And finally, though, we covered this in our webinar last week, FinTech is a growing market here. We're ranked 6th in the world. We've got a $4 billion industry with about roughly 800 companies in the FinTech space. But there's also broader opportunities across financial services. So, areas like payment tech, wealth tech, reg tech, and then your sort of broader ESG and sustainability platforms. So in general, the UK government, we've been working really hard to bring these opportunities to these areas to UK businesses. So last year we ran a net zero innovation mission, for example, that was aimed to support climate tech companies and connecting them into ANZ corporates. But this year, we're also bringing out additional trade missions. So in August, we're hosting a FinTech trade mission, and in November, a digital and data trade mission. So if you're interested in learning more about the work that we do and the work that Austrade does, please, drop a line in the chat and we can reach out separately. Go to the next slide, please. So that's kind of our formalities done and our market overviews done. So thanks very much to Richard and Anna for joining me in those overviews. And really, we're here to set the scene as to why the FTA is so important and how it helps Australian and UK businesses. Now, we're going to kick off with a panel discussion on the benefits of the FTA. So I'd like to welcome back Anna and Richard on camera, along with Kate Montgomery, who's the Director of Market for Telstra EMEA, and George Riddell, who's the Director of Trade Strategy at EY. I think we'll kick off with a nice little question for Richard. So we've kind of heard a little bit about the overview and the purpose of the FTA. But in practical terms, how do you think the FTA can help facilitate more export opportunities in both directions?
Thank you, Kirsty. So I think in this business, in tech, it really does two things. It locks us together in that regulatory kind of cooperation space through those dialogues. And then it also helps the mobility of our people and the recognition of qualifications across our people as well. So it's some of that ability to get people backwards and forwards, people working together, people collaborating together in this space.
Fantastic. And I guess a follow-up question for both you, Richard, and for George. I mean, from an ongoing trade policy perspective, we've mentioned that we're in that first 100 days of implementation. There's going to be ongoing dialogues that happen throughout the free trade agreement. But how do you think the ongoing Aus-UK relationship behind the FTA is going to look, particularly for government, but also for industry and businesses? And George, I might get you to start, if that's all right.
Thanks, Kirsty, and it's great to be here this morning / evening for colleagues down in Australia. I think, when businesses, and in particular technology businesses, are looking to expand internationally and scale beyond sort of their domestic home market, there's a lot of different factors that they'll be looking at. One of them is how easy is it to start trading with that other country? And, when you look at the FTA and what it does around ease of establishment, mobility of talent, and data flows, those are really important factors for businesses when, being able to trade between the UK and Australia. Looking more broadly, obviously, we're in quite a complicated geopolitical situation around the world. The tech sector has been at the forefront of bearing the brunt of those geopolitical tensions. And I think in particular, looking beyond the FTA to the AUKUS initiatives and sort of the other bilateral cooperation that the UK and Australia has, that's an incredibly important thing, around sort of ensuring that any investment and trade that's happening is not going to be disrupted and will be able to continue in a strong way.
Great, thanks, George. And Richard, anything you want to add there?
Well, just to say that you do business with people you trust and people you can work with, and you look to do it in places where you have certainty. And I think the UK-Australia relationship has that in bucket loads, and the FTA gives even more certainty for that alignment in the future.
Great, thank you. I mean, question next, I guess, for Anna. So we've sort of talked a little bit about data flows, and George just mentioned it as well. So I guess from your perspective, how is the enhanced digital trade and free movement of data provisions going to impact business operations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think all of the tech businesses are playing in the area of using data. So it's such an important component to what they do. The free trade agreement enables free flow of data between our two jurisdictions. So it removes any restrictive practices or requirements that might be currently in place to host data in a new jurisdiction, or to get additional approvals to be able to move data across, I guess, let's say, borders. So those will be eliminated. So businesses operating in the tech space can feel confident that they can collect, process, transfer data between the two countries without facing any unnecessary red tape and any unnecessary costs that I know that sometimes they currently have to go through various application approval processes that also attract costs. So that will make it a lot more easier and streamlined. I think also important to point out on the whole digital piece that there's also will be the electronic contract signatures will be widely recognised across the two jurisdictions, which will also make it a lot easier for those data-driven digital businesses to operate across the two jurisdictions as well. And something that I like to point out, so apologies if those on the call already heard it, because I do say it all the time, is that I'm quite interested in what does that mean in terms of new products and solutions as well. So what can businesses do to innovate now that we have this free flow of data between the two borders? Now there is more opportunity and recognition of electronic contracts, signatures, etc. What new solutions and offerings can technology business come up with to really leverage that opportunity and also make it easier for consumers to engage across both jurisdictions and across borders as well?
Absolutely, Anna. I mean, I think that's a great question. Probably something I'm going to start asking as well. So I may steal that one from you when I talk to other businesses. But I mean, okay, that's a pretty good segue. And Kate, dropping to you. I mean, are you expecting to use these types of provisions at Telstra, and what do they mean for you from a broader business sense?
Okay, so good morning, good evening, everyone. Telstra is very positive about the FTA. Just to echo the comments, it sets a stable and positive context for business expansion between our two nations. And I would also echo George's point about the importance of the AUKUS Pact, and businesses can expand internationally knowing that we have that government endorsement and that there's a long-term stable and context that gives us that confidence. But more specifically, I think around the data regulations, it removes perhaps the hindrance of mandatory in-country data hosting, and that allows a B2B IT services company like Telstra International to help clients develop a data strategy, a cloud hosting strategy that drives digital efficiency and is not mandated by regulation. So data can be hosted according to customer requirement or vertical market needs, for example, at the edge, and not necessarily in country as a matter of course. And then a further point that I think is really positive around the FTA, as I say, anyone from Australia that's joined the webinar will know Telstra in our home market as a telco provider. Outside of Australia, Telstra International is a B2B services provider. And so we find that many of our clients use London as a springboard also into Europe. So I think that, this pivotal relationship between the UK and the Australia is actually going to be a catalyst for unlocking pan-regional expansion as we use Australia. We see our clients using Australia as a springboard into Asia and vice versa for London into Europe. So on the whole, really positive about the opportunities that the FTA unlocks.
Thanks very much, Kate. And Anna, you and I have sort of gone through what the trends are looking like in Australia and the UK. I guess some of the unifying themes that we see when we talk to companies is that they're also interested in working into the public sector. So I guess what new opportunities will become available for Australian and UK businesses because of the FTA's procurement provisions?
So yes, a very good point, Kirsty. So procurement provisions will enable both companies to bid on contracts in both jurisdictions and be treated the same as the local providers when bidding for those contracts. That includes government contracts, and that's a huge opportunity, right? In the past, where there might have been restrictions for UK companies to bid on government contracts in Australia or Australian companies on government contracts in the UK, those restrictions are now being eliminated, which opens up such a big, I guess, part of the market for those companies to compete for. So I think that's very important and critical, and will create really significant opportunities in both directions.
Thank you. Now, Richard, we'll throw back to you. So people mobility provisions have also been promoted as sort of one of the major wins of the FTA. Can you take us through some of, I guess, the key changes and how you see businesses benefiting from them going forward?
Yeah, sure, Kirsty. But maybe just before I do that, to come in on what Anna was saying there. So those government procurement contracts and the accessibility to those on kind of equal terms, terms the same as if it's a British business coming to Australia, it's the same terms that an Australian business would bid on. I think you've still got to remember, you've got to be smart and you've got to understand your market when you do that. So there may be on both sides. So I know, because it was something I was looking at this afternoon, but for some Australian contracts, for example, there is a local content provision. And so whether you are an Australian business or whether you are a UK business, you will have to meet those same provisions that the contracting authority is specifying. So remember, you still need to be on your game, smart, and know your market. So going back to your original question, talking about some of the mobility provisions. So I think the first thing that we have is that that working holiday youth mobility scheme that I mentioned before. So on both sides, people will be able to increase for up to 3 years. When Brits come to Australia, they no longer have to have specified requirements. They're eligible to work across any industry, and for Brits coming to Australia, they've already come into force from the 1st of July, and going the other way, that will be available from the 1st of July next year. And we also have that intra-company transfer element that we spoke about, where there is no longer the need to have jobs against that skilled migration list, that it's open up to people across all industries, which I think is something very special because that has only been available between Australia and New Zealand before. And for the UK to join that, I think is a really big step forwards.
Great. And I mean, from the business perspective, we might start with you, George. I mean, are you planning, or your clients planning to take up these provisions within EY?
Thanks. So certainly on the mobility front, yes, that is something that we look to actively leverage when, sort of making those decisions around staffing and resourcing. The one thing I would say is, we also look at it for what sorts of benefits it can bring, and particularly when we're talking about, the exchange of knowledge and skills among our workforce, making sure that there is that collaboration, that we are able to go over. Virtual is great, don't get me wrong, through the pandemic and everything else, but that business mobility is really drive new innovation and thinking and development of ideas. It's something that's incredibly important to us. So leveraging these provisions is something that we are already starting to do, but we'll look to expand on in the future.
Thanks, George. And Kate, what about you at Telstra?
Yeah, I mean, that mobility of talent is absolutely crucial, particularly in the current skill shortage, particularly in tech and cyber. The FTA provides specifically a more flexibility for
Sorry, Kate, I think we've just lost your audio very briefly. You're just on mute.
Sorry,
there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, particularly intercompany transfer, I think is super important. We know, don't we, in the battle for talent, that candidates and employees are looking for more than just that pay slip at the end of the month. They're looking for self-determination. They're looking for opportunity to expand their careers, and having exposure to different worldviews and alternative ways of doing business is absolutely crucial. It enriches both the individual, the organisation, and the economy overall, I think. And I would call out as well, we talked about space. We mentioned the UK-Australia space bridge, and where you have, really global markets with specialist skills, being able to access a greater pool of talent to drive that innovation is absolutely crucial. So, I'm really looking forward to the expansion of mobility of talent, particularly, I think, for those mid-career candidates who are in their, up to 35, makes a big difference in bringing in those really hard to find specialist skills.
And Kirsty, if you don't mind, I might jump in to give a bit of a plug to the Innovation and Early Careers pilot that's launching on the 25th of September. So at this stage, it's a pilot, so it's really in one direction for now, so attracting UK talent to Australia, but we're hoping that if the pilot goes well, it will also open up opportunities in the other direction as well. And I think that's a really interesting pathway both for the UK businesses who have a branch in Australia to bring UK talent over to work in their business in Australia, but also for Australian businesses looking to bring UK talent to help them innovate and bring some of the skills and expertise that UK might have that we currently might not have or competing for in Australia. So there's two streams. One is for early careers, so for graduates with skills and experience in different fields, and the other one is for innovators. For graduates, it's for placements for up to a year in Australia, and then for innovators, it could be up to 3 years. So that's a very exciting pilot. People can find more information about that on the DFAT website, and applications open on 25th of September.
Very exciting. Mark the calendars. Thank you, Anna. And I mean, while you have the mic, we've heard from Richard at the beginning of the session that one of the exciting parts of the FTA is that we do have it's the first trade agreement to include a comprehensive innovation chapter. And I guess from your perspective, how do you see the innovation chapter impacting and sort of providing increased market access and opportunities for technology businesses?
Yes, I think it's very exciting. Something that Richard also pointed out earlier on is that this agreement is exciting because it's not just about goods, it's about services. And I think innovation chapter is that other aspect of the agreement that really takes it to be a more modern, comprehensive agreement than some of the other free trade agreements that have been negotiated in the past. So the innovation chapter has a commitment that there will be an innovation dialogue established between Australia and the UK in the next 12 months. And really the focus of that innovation dialogue, I think, would be three-pronged. So first of all, it will look at regulation. So creating aligned regulation between Australia and the UK that helps facilitate some of those innovative technologies. So it's regulation around AI and some of the new tech that's coming up. So that's quite exciting for companies because one, the dialogue would look at how they can create appropriate regulation that's not restrictive, but two, there will also be alignment between what's happening and how things are regulated in Australia and the UK, which will obviously make it a lot easier for businesses to implement their products in both jurisdictions. The other area of the dialogue will be to look at any existing restrictive policies and practices. So that will provide companies an opportunity to feed feedback into that dialogue, whether it's through Austrade or DBT or others, in terms of what is currently actually restricting some of that innovation and how that can be addressed across both jurisdictions. And third, it will encourage both countries to identify areas where we would like to work more together to innovate, run kind of co-designed R&D projects across any particular areas, whether it's health or whether it's, space, where we want to do something together to test, innovate and develop new products and solutions together across both jurisdictions, which obviously then will create a platform for businesses to tap into that and play an exciting role within that.
Thanks, Anna. And Kate, I mean, Telstra has a great innovation culture itself. I guess from the business perspective, how do you think the innovation chapter is going to impact industry?
Well, broadly, it allows the opening up of a much bigger pool of investor funding to UK and Australia scale-ups. Telstra Ventures, specifically investing in the Australian scale-ups across their areas of AI, cyber, and green tech. And I think, sometimes there'll be areas of alignment. So with Telstra Health, we see there's a great number of synergies between our health systems. But in other areas, perhaps we can learn from each other and bring innovation into our respective countries. And arguably, for a number of reasons, Australia is perhaps a market leader in green tech and sustainability innovation. And I think there's some great examples and some great learning that Australia can bring innovation into the UK and vice versa.
Thanks, Kate. And, George, from a trade perspective and our ongoing relationship, I mean, how do you see the innovation impacting how we work together and how business works together?
Thanks. So, I mean, it's been said a number of times here that, the FTA creates a platform for future cooperation. And I think the real value of this is going to be, really, not everything is always going to get right first time round. And, this is complicated areas. Regulations are developing incredibly rapidly. So the most important thing is that business is feeding into that discussion, that, they're not sitting on the sidelines, but because there are now these regular points of contact, particularly on the innovation front, but also on the regulatory cooperation, mobility, whatever the case may be, the businesses need to be feeding in order to be, making sure that the agenda is suiting what's right for them and boosting that bilateral trade and investment that the companies are ultimately undertaking. So yeah, it's a start, but we need to be using it in order to make it the most effective that it can be and really leverage that opportunity.
Absolutely. And Anna, Richard, anything else you want to add on that?
No, I was just noticing a question in the chat there from Brian about research and innovation grants as well, though. And I was going to say that sadly not, Brian, it's not default access yet to grants in both countries, but there are many joint research grants that are available to the UK and Australia, and we can send you a little bit more information about those. They're available in the UK through the UKRI, but sadly it's not a default position of access to national grants at this point in time.
Thanks, Richard. And we are coming up to sort of the end of our questions for the panel, so please don't be shy. Put any questions that you have in the chat bar or the Q&A so that we can ask them with our last few minutes. But I guess sort of one final question from me, and it's for both Kate and George. I guess, why have you or the businesses that you work with selected UK or Australia for international expansion, and what's, I guess, the experience been so far? And some of our favorite questions are always, what's worked well and what have some of the challenges been? So if you can give us some examples, that would be fantastic. And we might start with ladies first, please, Kate.
Well, I don't know if Telstra selected, as a long-standing technology company, that the kind of decision was already made. I would say that in Telstra International, for the divisions overseas outside of Australia, what we see is a great. So we've talked about the cultural synergies, but also I think the whole Asia Pacific region in terms of manufacturing and innovation and that energy to do business. I think that international expansion into that region is just enormously positive, and I think that the FTA can only drive better opportunities for us all. So I think, and we've touched on also sort of the geopolitical arena and the emergence of Australia as a world power on that stage. So I think all the headwinds are driving towards this greater cooperation, this greater opportunity that the FTA can only help to unleash.
Thanks, Kate. And George, what about you and the experience that you've had with your clients?
Thanks. So yeah, obviously EY is well established in both the UK and Australia, but working with clients around sort of the decision-making factors that they take into account at the moment, sort of in addition to the FTA, I would say, for Australian companies looking at the UK, it's some supporting factors, definitely access to the capital markets. In London is an incredibly important point around scaling and international expansion. There's also the supporting ecosystem that is here in the UK around the financial and related professional services, whether that's insurance, consulting, legal services. You do have it's not quite a one-stop shop, but it is easy to get that, in addition to quite a vibrant startup tech scene that we have here in the country. In terms of UK companies looking at Australia, I know we've touched on a couple over the course of this conversation. I would really highlight the role of environmental technologies and sort of the amount of work that's happening in that space at the moment, particularly as it relates to some of the critical minerals discussions and investment strategy that Australia's launched over the last 6 months. That's driving a huge amount of interest from UK companies wanting to expand further in this space.
Thanks very much, George. And I've seen a question has come in from the chat from David. And the question is, if we were to expand to Australia as an APAC hub, what are the available capabilities, support skills to facilitate regional expansion from an Australia base? Anybody want to put their hands up to answer that question? If not, I can lend a DBT focus.
Well, I mean, I'm quite interested in the DBT focus. I think from an Australian perspective, once you have your Australian entity, we offer support to Australian companies as Australia to grow to other markets. So we would be assisting you to grow into other markets across APAC. You would have access to the Australian free trade agreements that Australia has with most Asian countries, which will make it a lot easier for you to do business across Asia as an Australian entity. So that's a huge opportunity in itself. Everything we just talked about, the barriers that's been removed between Australia and the UK, we have similar agreements with most Asian countries. So those barriers have been removed in that area. And then the support that Australia would offer companies who are exploring international markets across Asia would be around understanding the regulatory environment, understanding various requirements, understanding where the opportunities might lie, helping businesses find partners, customers across those Asian markets, navigate, I guess, cultural differences, etc. So we've got teams in most of those Asian markets, and we will be there to help you grow and support your growth, international growth.
Thanks, Anna. And George, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, thank you. I'd probably say, sort of experiences in Australia myself, it's a well-trodden path, and there's a huge amount, in addition to the Austrade and DBT support that you can get, there's also a huge amount of sort of local businesses and chambers of commerce who have an incredible, deep expertise and experience in this area, whether it's the ASEAN Australian Chamber of Commerce or with individual APAC countries. That, it is something that Australian businesses focus a lot on, and there's a huge amount of that community and discussion happening across sort of the main business hubs in Australia. So very much something that when you're there, you can get involved in quite, a comprehensive way.
Thanks, George. And I mean, just echoing on the DBT front, very similar to what both George and Anna have had to say. And we also have countries, so post in country across the APAC region, who can lend you that extra support in addition to how we would support you going from the UK into Australia. So it is that part around connections, understanding the local market and local culture. And don't forget as well, there's a lot of organisations across the UK that are working to support things like trade missions into the APAC region, and quite a number of them will tag on multiple countries at once. So you can kind of get that sense as you're looking at Australia, you can also be exploring the other APAC regions at the same time. Now, we've had another great question come in, and probably the last one that we've got time for. So if you did have other questions, pop them in the chat. We can always come back to you by email as well. Talking about from Joseph, the geopolitical complexities will increase the demand in defence and increase the prominence of the space sector. So do we see that happening? And if so, does South Australia play a role in that? Who wants to jump in on the space side of things?
Well, I can see that Richard's already put in some information there. But yeah, so I'll just be brief and then happy to hand over to Richard. Yes, there's already a strong focus on it. To one of Richard's points, we already have Australia-UK Space Bridge framework in place. So we've been working on enhancing collaboration between Australia and UK on space for the last 2 years. But yes, absolutely, with more focus on defence and security, that we are seeing increased engagement in a space sector with the implementation of AUKUS, so the trilateral agreement between Australia, UK and the US. There will be opportunities for more technology companies to tap into various supply chains around that. We're still working through what does that exactly look like, but that will create environment for more tech businesses to operate across that triangle and plug into those supply chains as well. So I guess in short, yes, but there's still a bit that we need to work through. But over to you, Richard.
Yeah, no, I think Anna's covered it really well. One thing I'd just like to highlight, so last week in Sydney, we launched together with the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, an agroclimate sandpit event where we've got 15 UK and 15 Australian experts looking to collaborate in this space using space tech. Around agriculture and climate. So there's lots of stuff going on. Please do get in touch and we can share a little bit more with you.
Thanks very much. And thank you all. It's unfortunately all the time we've got for questions now. So thanks so much to our panelists, Anna and Richard, Kate and George. And thanks very much everyone who's joined us on the call this evening / this morning. Now, to find out more about the FTA, you can search DFAT UK FTA for information on Australia, or UK Government Australia FTA for information in the UK. Please reach out to us at Austrade if you're an Australian business looking to expand overseas, and then to DBT if you're a British tech business looking to expand outside the UK. We did have that question come through in the chat, and I've just popped my email address in there, so happy for you to reach out to me directly. And that concludes our session. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to hear from you all soon.